When you start to look at the intelligence of all the possible threats out there, the things that could happen, I think it probably makes you sleep a little bit less well at night.
Morning to you, Peter Ricketts.
Bonjour.
Bonjour à vous. We should say Lord Ricketts, former ambassador to France, former national security advisor, and
former boss of the Foreign Office, where, Peter, you and I were colleagues, though you may not have known it, unless you saw this very handsome 18-year-old, as I was back then. I spent my gap year work at the Foreign Office. Don't want to overstate my diplomatic credentials, but you were political director at the time. It was the year of 9/11 and the year after, and fair enough, it'd be fair to say that you've gone on to greater things since then.
How could I forget seeing you then, Amol?
Quite.
It's great to see you again.
It is slightly, Amol's experience of the Foreign Office is a bit like me saying that I served a big back and chips and then going to the boss of someone in a FTSE 200 company. We were colleagues.
Well, it's nice to know that we're fellow Mandarins.
Exactly.
Amol.
I represented Britain at an international conference, I'll have you know, in Belgrade, no less. And we were speaking, I should say, ahead of the possibility, it's still only a possibility, that actually someone who was a permanent secretary in Keir Starmer when he was Director of Public Prosecutions is going to be the next Prime Minister. We've got to look the other way and look across the Atlantic and try and make sense of what a Trump presidency, Chapter 2, would look like. Trump is a very particular character and a very big personality, and there are all sorts of issues about the relationships we do or don't have with him and his team and so forth. But there are particular urgent issues in terms of Israel and Ukraine where he may be in some senses erratic, but some of what he has said seems to put him at odds with Britain potentially. For instance, on the recognition of a Palestinian state and on supporting an ongoing support for Ukraine in its struggle against Russia. If you were back in number 10 on Friday morning advising a new government and saying this is what you need to be careful of in terms of what's coming down the line from a potential Trump presidency, what would be those concerns?
I think, first of all, you've got to start building bridges with the Republicans in the US. And indeed, if it is a Labour government that wins, David Lammy has been starting to do that because a British government has to deal with whatever American president is in power. You can't, refuse to do that. So I think, let's build bridges with the Republican Party. But also, if we do get a President Trump, it seems to me to increase the reasons for drawing closer to our European partners. Because on many of these issues, on Ukraine, for example, supporting Ukraine, keeping up sanctions on Russia, on Israel, on China, some of the big policy issues where Trump may well differ from all the Europeans, that includes the UK. And therefore, I think there's a stronger case for building alliances across Europe, starting with this European meeting on the 18th of July, not overtly saying this is a kind of defense against Trump, but putting in place the pragmatic arrangements that will allow us to have maximum influence in trying to work with the Trump administration, all together Europeans facing the same issues, but recognizing we're not going to get special deals because we are the UK from a Trump administration. He will put us in the same basket as other European countries.
One other big overview thought for you, Peter, and I don't want it to be a depressing thought, but isn't the only person who would find this conversation and the situation we're looking at uplifting Vladimir Putin? I mean, you must look at this and just think divisions in Europe, France, one of the traditional twin motors of the EU, in real difficulty, whatever the outcome of Sunday's election. America horribly divided. He must be just rubbing his hands.
It rather plays to his narrative that the West is past it. The West hasn't got the staying power. We're effete. And if he doubles down, he can last us out on Ukraine. And that's what we've got to prove wrong, absolutely, because he revels in discord, disagreement, chaos in Europe. Of course, with Le Pen, he's got somebody who's been a long-time supporter of Russia, and a number of other populist right countries around Europe are very much pro-Russian. Orban in Hungary, Mr. Fico in Slovakia. There are parts of what's going on in Europe that must be grist to his mill, and the task for a new British government is to rally the Europeans as far as possible to make sure that doesn't happen. That we can show Trump we've got the staying power to see this through. So let's not get too depressed. There is a cycle in politics. The UK is turning a cycle probably this coming few days, and then it'll be up to a British Prime Minister to try and lead Europe in the right direction in terms of showing stamina.
I know you're very busy, Peter, but not least in the House of Lords, but do you miss it? Do you miss the ins and outs of being in number 10, Prime Minister saying to you, we've got this urgent issue in Washington, or bomb's gone off here, or someone's been elected? Do you miss that sort of the hustle of being in foreign policy, the corridors of powers, not just the brush bys, but the actual bilaterals in that room?
It's fascinating to be in the room, yes. I don't miss the 3 a.m. phone call from the White House with an, oh my God, something's happened. That's fine for a few years, but quite nice to leave behind you. No, there's nothing like being in the room, but at least sitting in the Today Programme podcast studio, we can be the next best thing, and we can, have a good shot at what's going in the room.
It's fascinating, the 3 a.m. call, isn't it? Because it's used in American politics, actually, in adverts. The phone ringing, I think it's been used for decades. You just simply see a phone ringing and someone picking it up,
Yeah.
and the question being asked, do you trust the guy you're going to vote for?
Yeah.
To answer that phone and do that right thing.
Well, it does happen, I can assure you.
And that, just one thought ahead, final thought if we could, ahead to that Friday morning in Downing Street. There'll be the speech for the Prime Minister, the visit to the King, etc., etc. But the thing I suspect they won't forget is A, writing that letter to the nuclear submarine commanders, and B, presumably opening the sort of file as National Security Advisor you saw every day, which says, this is the level of threat. Here's the information now about who the bad guys really are, who's coming for us, how severe that threat is.
Absolutely. I mean, the letter to the submarine commander is just worth a moment. The Prime Minister has to go away into a room on his own and write out in manuscript 4 letters for the 4 British nuclear submarines to give the captain guidance on what he does if there's a nuclear war. He can't hear anything out of London. He can't even hear the BBC. London has been obliterated. The nuclear submarine captain is under the sea with a load of nuclear weapons. What does he do? And nobody knows what the Prime Minister writes in that letter, because at each Prime Minister it's taken back and it's shredded. But that's probably the most sobering minute, I think. Prime Ministers come out of that feeling a bit different about things. And then, yes, as you say, when you start to look at the intelligence of all the possible threats out there, the things that could happen, I think it probably makes you sleep a little bit less well at night.